Okay, so we're going to be talking about muscle histology. We start off by talking about the difference between skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. For the most part, it's a lot of the same information we learn with tissues. There is some differences though, and we'll get into that. And then we'll look specifically at skeletal muscle. We'll look at all the different connective tissue that holds your muscles together. And then we'll look even more zoomed in at the actual organelles inside. Okay, so skeletal muscle, the cell itself, so we're looking at the cell of a skeletal muscle. It's going to be single, long, cylindrical, that looks like a cylinder, multinucleated. Every cell has multiple nuclei, and it's striated. So fibers have stripes. It's voluntary. It's the only muscle out of the three that you have conscious control unless you're dealing with reflexes. That's when you go to the doctor and they hit you in the patellar region. The contraction, so this is something that's new. So the type of contraction, so your contractions are rapid, very fast with a lot of force, but it tires easily and you must rest after short periods of activity. So as you know, you can't, if you're exercising or if you're lifting something or you're using those muscles, your muscles will start to burn. That's because you don't have enough energy, and that's actually lactic acid buildup, which we'll talk a little bit more later on. So now we're going to get to smooth. Smooth muscle you're going to find like in the irises of your eye. They're going to be inside of your hollow internal organs, your blood vessels, things like that. So it got its name because when you look at it, there's no striations. It's involuntary. It cannot be consciously controlled. So in other words, like you don't have any conscious control of what's occurring inside of these organ systems. The type of contraction is slow and contained. The shape, when you're looking at a cell, the shape is called spindle shaped, and it only has one nuclei, which as we know is different than skeletal muscle. The connective tissue you're going to see is called endomysium. You'll learn a lot more about this in a little bit. Skeletal muscle, we didn't cover it because basically the rest of this lecture is about the different connective tissue. There's two different types of smooth muscle. You have visceral and multi-unit. The multi-unit is where you're going to find in the irises and the walls of your blood vessels. Visceral will be like in the hollow organs, all except the heart, because your heart is cardiac muscle. So what is the difference? It's how it's controlled. So when you're looking at visceral, a neuron will come in and it will control many cells. So this will be like in the irises or your blood vessels. And then your multi-unit, a neuron will come in and control every cell independently. This is because in your organs have a lot more different functions that has to go through, and it needs to be controlled simultaneously. Cardiac, so these are appears only in the heart. It's composed of striated cells, just like skeletal muscle, and it also has that cylindrical shape, but it's branched. So when you're looking at it, it has a three-dimensional network, and they're all interconnected. There's only one nuclei. So cardiac looks very similar to your skeletal, if you remember. A difference was that it's branched and it only has one cell. Skeletal muscle has multi. The connective tissue is endomysium, and I'll talk more about what that is. That basically it covers every single cell. It contains intercalated discs. And what those do is they allow the muscle impulses to travel very fast from cell to cell. Cardiac muscle fibers, the way they contract, it's longer than skeletal muscle fibers. So once the contraction occurs, it can contract for a longer period of time without tiring. It's slow and has a rhythmic contraction. So the and that is your muscle actually contracting. So as you can see here, you can see the intercalated discs here, 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 and here. I hope you're kind of a pro at that at this point. And you can see striations, and you can see how it looks like it's branched. And this here, like in this picture, this would be the intercalated disc. So you have this diagram here. Over here you have body location, where it's found, cell shape, striated or not, connective tissue components, so this will be new, voluntary or involuntary, and type of contraction. You're going to fill this table out, and I'm going to actually check it in class tomorrow. So make sure you have it done. I'm going to sign next to it. Okay, so the rest of this entire unit basically is going to be dealing with skeletal muscles. I chose this guy, so you remember that it's skeletal muscle and not anything else. So let's get started. So we're going to be looking underneath the microscope. What does a cell look like, and why does it look that way? What's its function eventually? Okay, so a skeletal muscle cell is called a myocyte. Myo means muscle, cyte means cell. A skeletal muscle cell is a single muscle cell. Remember, so this right here would be your entire muscle cell. We'll talk about the myofibrils in a second, but it can be confusing because everything looks cylindrical. Just remember that your entire cell itself has that tube shape to it. Inside of your cell, so when you look inside, you're going to see there's these organelles called myofibrils, and these are actually what's doing all the contracting. So all of these are myofibrils. So your muscle cell is actually filled with these myofibrils, which are organelles that actually contract. So just imagine all of these structures contracting at the same time, and that's what makes this whole muscle contract. So be careful, they're both the same shape. You have your myofibril, which is the organelle inside of your cell, and your cell itself is also cylindrically shaped. It plays a major role in muscle contraction, and you have these alternating light and dark bands, which we'll talk about more later on. And that's actually what's doing the contracting itself. They're moving past each other, which causes an entire muscle to contract. So again, this is your large muscle fiber, your myocyte, right? Your muscle fiber is another word for saying muscle cell. I cut a piece out, and when I cut in, I see all these organelles, and all these organelles with these bands, which we'll learn about those bands later on, are called your myofibrils. So your myofibrils are the organelles inside of your myocyte. A lot of myo, so just be careful with the terms. The sarcolemma is the plasma membrane, so that's what's on the outside of your cell. Okay, that'd be like the plasma membrane of your cell. That's what lets things in and out of the cell. And the sarcoplasm is the cytoplasm, the gooey fluid inside of your cell. Okay, so you have the myocyte, which is your muscle fiber. You've got the myofibrils, which are the muscle, or which are the organelles that do the contracting inside. The sarcolemma, which is the cell membrane, and the sarcoplasm, which is the fluid inside of it. Okay, so there's a lot of connective tissue when you're dealing with skeletal muscle. The reason why is because so much contracting is occurring that if you didn't have layer upon layer of connective tissue, it would rip. Okay. So the first one we're going to talk about is, so as you know, this is your bone. Okay, imagine this is your femur. You have a tendon here. And this is your muscle, okay? So what we did, we cut the muscle in half, and we're looking inside. And what we did is this right here is your muscle cell, okay? So your myocyte, your muscle cell, remember I told you that you have all these organelles inside that are contracting. As they're contracting, you wouldn't want your cell to rip. So on the outside of your cell, you have this enclosed connective tissue, delicate sheath called an endomysium. So endomysium, you have a diagram, and I labeled the myocyte for you, so label that, and the endomysium. I don't know why I spelled it wrong. Sorry, endomysium's up here. It's not endomysium. So that would be the structure. So you can see like a white outside of it. So this is your cell. And on the outside of your cell, you have a connective tissue called endomysium. So all of your muscle cells are bundled together. So these are all cells, right? So all your cells are bundled together. The bundle, and that'll be like your verb to help you remember what it is called a fascicle. Okay, so your fascicle would be the bundle holding all your muscle cells together. So when all these are contracting, it's holding it together so it doesn't rip, essentially. On the outside of the fascicle, so this is your fascicle's been pulled out, so really it should all be flat, just like this here. But on the outside of your fascicle, you have another connective tissue called the paramecium. Your paramecium is on the outside of your fascicle. And please don't forget to label these as you go. I'll be checking that tomorrow also. On the outside of your entire muscle, you have the epimysium. Okay, so your epimysium is the connective tissue covering the outside of the entire muscle itself. So these are all connective tissues. And then you have your tendon. Your tendon's connecting your muscle to your bone. Okay, so here's a diagram that's a little different, but you can see it different ways. So you have your muscle fiber, okay? Your muscle fiber has a connective tissue on the outside. That connective tissue is called the endomysium. All of your muscle fibers are bundled together in the fascicle. Your fascicle has a connective tissue around it called the perimysium. And then on the outside of your muscle, you have the epimysium, and the tendon connects your muscle to the bone. Okay, so don't worry about this now. I'll have it a part of the ed puzzle. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at each one of these myofibrils. Now we talked about all the connective tissue that's going on. We're going to look at one of these myofibrils, and we're going to be talking about these lines. Okay, so when you're looking at all these lines, there's names to them. So again, these lines, so when you're contracting, you have these thick and thin myofilaments, which I'll talk about in a minute. And as they're contracting, just imagine all of these moving towards each other, towards this line. The thick slide past the thin. Okay, so so what we're doing right now, sorry, going back one more time, we're looking at this myofibril, and these myofibrils from here to here, this is called a sarcomere, this is a sarcomere, and this is a sarcomere, and these sarcomeres contract and move towards the middle. So that's what it talks about here. Sarcomeres are chains of tiny contracting units, and they align from end to end like boxcars on a train. The myofilament are all those lines I was talking about. They make the pattern on on the organelle. You have myosin. Myosin's the thick myofilaments, and actin, which is your thin myofilaments. Okay, so again, so when you look at this is like kind of like an accordion and how it contracts at the thin, and you can see how this is a lot thicker. You really want to understand these structures because when we get into the physiology and we're talking about like how the myosin head comes up, you want to know these structures. Okay, so you have different parts of the line. So you have M line, the H zone, A band, Z line, and I band. So I'll let you just write these down, and it's easier for me to explain as it's on the picture. So just pause it now and label. Oh, and the sarcomere, which I already went over. Okay, so when we're looking at, so what we're doing right now is we're looking at the myofibril. So these are the organelles that are inside of your cell. So when you look at these, you're seeing all these different lines. So the thin is your actin, and the thick red is your myosin. When you're looking at this, the middle, you have your M line. The M line would be like right in the middle, M line middle. Okay, Z disc, they actually literally look like Z's. Okay, the region around your Z line or your Z disc, and it's only thin actin, is called your I band. Your A band would be containing, it surrounds the center and it contains both the thin and thick myofilaments. Even smaller, you have the H zone. The H zone would just be the thick myofilament, the myosin that's in the center. And I think that's all of them. Yeah, and the I band, I think I already went over that. Okay, and here's another way to look at it as well. Okay, so don't fret. I'm going to go over all this stuff in class because I know it can be a little confusing. Just make sure you know your connective tissue and what they represent. But when it comes to like specifically understanding in class, just get the notes down for now, answer the questions, but in class I'm going to go over all of it person to person, and then you'll actually label this in a diagram. So by tomorrow you will have a better understanding. Okay, I'll see you next time.